At 7 a.m., inside Studio 1A at Rockefeller Plaza, the lights rise on Savannah Guthrie, as they have for years. The countdown ends. The red camera blinks. Millions of Americans see the same steady image, a composed anchor guiding the morning. In 2014, when she welcomed her daughter Annie, after openly sharing her journey to motherhood later in life, viewers felt like they were witnessing something deeply personal. But watching a family on television is not the same as sitting at their kitchen table. For over a decade, Savannah has allowed carefully measured glimpses into her life as a mother. She spoke candidly about fertility struggles, about becoming a parent in her 40s, about the gratitude she felt when Annie was born. To many viewers, that transparency felt complete. They believed they understood this chapter of her life. Yet, there was a private moment. No cameras, no studio lights that quietly changed the way Savannah understood her role at home. Here's what we know for certain. Savannah has said repeatedly in interviews that motherhood is the most important role of her life. Not the anchor chair, not the high-profile interviews. Motherhood. But raising a child while being the face of a national morning broadcast creates a kind of pressure most families never experience. The spotlight doesn't switch off just because the show ends. So, what happens when your child grows up inside the very light you've mastered professionally? There was one conversation that subtly shifted the rhythm of their home. If you grew up with a parent who had a very public job, did it make you proud or quietly pressured? And that conversation didn't begin on television. Annie Guthrie was born in August 2014, at a time when Savannah Guthrie was already a central figure in American morning television. Savannah had spoken openly about her path to motherhood, about becoming pregnant in her 40s, about the uncertainty that often accompanies fertility journeys later in life. When Annie arrived, it was celebrated not just privately, but publicly. Viewers who had followed Savannah's updates felt invested in that joy. In interviews, Savannah often described motherhood as a second chapter she never expected. At home, the environment Annie entered was structured and thoughtful. Both Savannah and her husband, Mike Feldman, have legal backgrounds trained to analyze, to argue carefully, to think several steps ahead. It was a household likely shaped by discipline and intention, but it was also shaped by television. There is something distinct about growing up in a home where a 4 a.m. alarm is normal, where your mother leaves before sunrise to appear live in millions of living rooms. Where breaking news can quietly rearrange dinner plans, Annie's earliest memories likely included studio references, early call times, and the faint hum of a profession that never fully powers down. At what point does a child begin to understand that her mother is not only mom, but someone millions recognize by name? That realization doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually. Children of public figures are not necessarily thrust into chaos. Often, their exposure is carefully managed. Photos are curated, appearances are limited, moments are shared selectively. Savannah has said on multiple occasions that she tries to shield her children from unnecessary attention, emphasizing her desire to give them as normal a childhood as possible. Visibility does not automatically mean overexposure, but awareness still exists. Even in the absence of paparazzi, there is the subtle understanding that classmates' parents watch your mother every morning, that teachers may reference her interviews, that strangers sometimes smile with recognition before you even know why. Social media posts, even the most measured ones, confirm that parts of your family life are seen, discussed, and quietly consumed. There is nothing inherently damaging in that reality. Many children feel proud. Some even find it exciting. But pride and pressure can coexist. As Annie moved into her early adolescent years, identity naturally began to sharpen. This is universal. It happens in every household, famous or not. A child who once defined herself through family roles begins to ask deeper questions. Where do I begin? Where does my family end? This is not about rebellion. There is no verified public statement, no dramatic disclosure. It is simply the quiet, developmental truth that every young person eventually confronts. Who am I, outside of the narrative I was born into? For Annie, that narrative happened to be amplified. She grew up in a home where communication was a profession, where stories were shaped daily, where public warmth and private boundaries coexisted. As awareness increased, the distinction between being part of a family story and authoring a personal one likely became more pronounced. Most children hold those questions privately at first. They surface in journal entries, in half-finished sentences, in moments of introspection that even parents may not immediately notice. But one day, that question stopped being private. Before Savannah Guthrie ever sat behind the Today Show desk, she was in a courtroom. She earned her law degree, practiced litigation, and built a career that many would have considered secure. Law is structured, predictable in its own demanding way. You prepare, you argue, you rely on precedent. Walking away from that world to enter journalism was not a lateral move, it was a reset. She has spoken about leaving law for journalism as a leap of faith. That leap meant starting over in a field where credibility must be earned on camera. Live television offers no quiet apprenticeship. Early reporting roles require adaptability. Mistakes unfold in real time. Viewers form impressions instantly. The pressure isn't theoretical, it's immediate and visible. Starting again in your 30s, in a new industry, under studio lights, is not small. It demands resilience and a tolerance for scrutiny that many never develop. When Savannah joined NBC News and later rose to co-anchor The Today Show, the scale changed again. Morning television is intimate but relentless. Ratings matter. Audience trust matters. Chemistry between anchors matters. Network shifts and industry competition form a backdrop that is rarely still, even if it remains largely unseen by viewers. Colleagues have described her as disciplined and deeply prepared, someone who studies, who anticipates, who understands the weight of live broadcast. Preparation became a form of control. In an environment where narratives can pivot quickly, steadiness is survival. And here's the subtle question beneath that rise. When you learn to guide national conversations, to frame complex issues for millions, what does that instinct for narrative control look like at home? Professional habits rarely stay at the office. Then came motherhood. Savannah became a mother in her 40s, welcoming Annie in 2014 and later her son Charlie. She has openly discussed the emotional toll of that chapter, the vulnerability of fertility struggles, the uncertainty that accompanies hoping for something deeply personal while living publicly. The gratitude she expressed when Annie was born was genuine and visible. But late motherhood intersects differently with a high-profile career. The years when professional expectations intensify can coincide with the years when children need emotional grounding most. She has admitted that balancing career and family has never felt seamless. Not chaotic, not fractured, just not seamless. In television, if something feels uneven, you adjust, you rewrite, you tighten transitions, you edit. Savannah learned to manage stories with precision, to choose what to share, to set boundaries thoughtfully, to protect what mattered. But there is one story no parent can fully edit: how their child experiences growing up. You can control the broadcast schedule. You can manage public perception. You can curate which family moment reaches the audience. You cannot fully script your child's internal world. Savannah's climb taught her how to stand steady in front of a nation. It taught her how to control narrative flow, how to hold composure under pressure, how to protect a message from spinning out of control. But there is a difference between managing a story and understanding a feeling, and that's where the story shifts. By the time Savannah Guthrie reached the peak of her visibility, her mornings had a rhythm that rarely changed. The alarm sounds at 3:30 a.m. Long before sunrise touches Manhattan, a car arrives in the dark. By the time most families are still asleep, she's already reviewing scripts. Overnight, developments are flagged. Political updates are revised. Segments are timed down to the second. In the makeup chair, producers hover with last-minute adjustments. A breaking headline can rearrange the entire show in minutes. The countdown begins 5, 4, 3, and suddenly she is live. Morning television demands rapid tone shifts, a serious global conflict at 7:02, a lighter human interest story at 7:18, a high-stakes interview at 7:32. Calm must feel effortless. Authority must feel approachable. Colleagues often describe her as intensely prepared. Preparation is her anchor. In live broadcast, it's the difference between chaos and clarity. And over years of repetition, that composure becomes instinct. The camera light turns red, and Savannah steps into a version of herself millions trust without question. Then, the show ends, and she steps into a different role. At home, there are no teleprompters, no commercial breaks, no control room whispering instructions in her ear. There is homework at the kitchen table, a backpack left by the door, bedtime routines that don't follow a broadcast schedule. On screen, she is calm, controlled, measured. At home, she is mom answering questions, listening to stories about school, navigating the small dramas that never trend but matter deeply. The contrast is subtle but significant. For Annie, growing up inside that contrast means watching two versions of the same person coexist. The woman trusted by a nation, and the woman reminding you to brush your teeth before bed. It raises a quiet question. Does a child ever feel like part of the image the world already recognizes? Not intentionally, not dramatically, just subtly, as if her identity begins adjacent to something larger. Savannah has always appeared careful about how much of her family life she shares. Holiday photos appear occasionally. A birthday post here. A warm anecdote on air. The warmth feels genuine because it likely is, but it is measured. Instagram is curated. Public glimpses are chosen. That restraint reflects protection. It also reflects experience. When you've spent years guiding narratives, you understand the cost of overexposure. But here's the tension that lingers beneath it. What happens if one day the story unfolds outside the frame you prepared? What if the next meaningful chapter doesn't arrive during a controlled segment or through a caption you drafted thoughtfully? Some stories don't wait for broadcast, and not every conversation happens under studio lights. There was no press tour, no sit-down interview, no headline confirming a dramatic rupture. The turning point, if you trace it honestly, likely looked like something far more familiar. A conversation that arrived when a child was finally old enough to articulate what had been quietly building for years. As children grow, their emotional vocabulary deepens. What once felt abstract becomes precise. Feelings that were sensed, but not spoken, begin to take shape in sentences. This is true in every family. It does not require scandal to be significant. There is no verified public statement from Annie, no official declaration. It would be inaccurate to suggest otherwise. But developmentally, there comes a moment when a young person tries to explain what it feels like to grow up inside someone else's spotlight. And one of the most complex emotions in that space is subtle. The feeling of being seen first as someone's daughter, before being seen as yourself. Not erased, not unloved, just predefined. Imagine being introduced with a last name that already carries recognition. Imagine walking into rooms where adults already know something about your family story before they know anything about you. For many children of public figures, that awareness doesn't feel dramatic. It feels ambient. It shows up in small ways. A classmate mentioning something they saw on TV. A teacher referencing your mother's interview. A passing comment that reminds you the world connects you to someone else first. There is no accusation in that reality. It is simply emotional texture. For a parent whose profession revolves around clarity and communication, hearing that texture described can be disorienting. Not because it signals failure, but because it reveals a layer that preparation cannot prevent. Savannah did not respond publicly. There was no defensive posture, no attempt to reshape a narrative through the media. From the outside, nothing changed. The broadcasts continued. The tone remained steady. The public persona held. But something internal likely shifted. In later interviews not tied to controversy, she emphasized the importance of really listening to your children, not multitasking while they speak, not preemptively solving the problem, listening. She has reflected on how motherhood humbled her, how children reveal blind spots you didn't know you had. There is no confirmation that those reflections were tied to any single conversation. It would be unfair to draw that straight line. But the language carries weight. Here is the deeper collision. You can control the structure of a broadcast. You can guide a live segment through chaos. You can anticipate difficult questions from world leaders. What you cannot control is how your child experiences growing up next to your success. You cannot fully script how the spotlight feels from their angle. You cannot edit their perception into something more comfortable. You cannot pre-package their emotional response. And that is the real twist here. Not scandal, not betrayal, not a family fracture. The twist is the limit of control. For someone who built a career on managing narratives, discovering that love does not equal immunity can be sobering. You can intend protection and still discover complexity. You can draw boundaries and still realize there are experiences happening inside your child that you didn't anticipate. That realization is not dramatic in a tabloid sense. It is intimate, and it is humbling. What do you think is harder, protecting your child from the world or protecting them from your own expectations? So what does a public figure do when privacy becomes the lesson? If you step back and lay the timeline out end to end, the pattern becomes clearer. A disciplined young lawyer leaves a stable profession and enters journalism, learning quickly that narrative control is survival. She rises through national news, becomes a co-anchor at one of the most visible desks in America, and masters the rhythm of live broadcast. Years later, she becomes a mother in her 40s, openly grateful, openly vulnerable about the path that brought her there. Her daughter grows up inside that arc, childhood unfolding alongside career discipline, peak fame, overlapping with bedtime routines. Eventually, emotional reckoning arrives not as scandal, but as awareness. Childhood, career precision, public visibility, private recalibration. That sequence matters. Savannah's professional life has always depended on shaping conversations responsibly. In journalism, clarity is a form of care. You guide the audience. You provide context. You decide what leads and what follows. Narrative control, in that world, isn't manipulation. It's structure. Motherhood operates on different rules. She has said more than once that motherhood humbled her. Humility and control can coexist, but not comfortably. Parenting introduces variables you cannot rehearse, emotions that don't arrive on schedule, reactions that don't follow scripts. You can be attentive and still be surprised. You can be intentional and still miss something subtle. Control does not equal carelessness. It reflects competence. Surrender does not equal weakness. It reflects trust. The deeper logic here is not about failure. It's about transition. Savannah learned to guide national narratives with discipline and composure. But guiding a child toward independence requires something else: the willingness to let their version of the story exist, even when it doesn't mirror your own. That shift is not dramatic. It's developmental. Layer in generational difference, and the terrain changes further. Savannah belongs to the broadcast generation. Visibility once flowed through networks, through structured platforms. Access was curated. Fame had gatekeepers. Even high-profile careers operated within clearer boundaries. Annie is growing up in an era where identity forms both offline and online. Even with careful parental boundaries, and by all visible accounts, Savannah has maintained them. Cultural visibility works differently now. Information circulates faster. Awareness arrives earlier. Peers can search, scroll, share. Visibility is no longer fully managed by adults. even when privacy is prioritized. This does not imply overexposure. There is no evidence of that. It simply reflects a broader cultural shift. Children today understand public presence differently. They encounter reputation in real time. They navigate a world where personal identity and public information intersect earlier than previous generations did. Inside that environment, emotional negotiation becomes more complex. And that is the reframe. This is not a story about conflict erupting, not about scandal concealed, not about a family unraveling. It is about two people, mother and daughter, moving through growth at different speeds. Savannah's growth involves loosening narrative control in the one arena where control is least effective. Annie's growth involves stepping forward as an individual within a story that began before she could write it. Public figures often talk about balance, work-life balance, public-private balance. The word sounds stable, symmetrical, reassuring. In practice, it's rarely balance. It's negotiation. Some seasons lean toward ambition. Some lean toward presence. Some conversations reconfigure the equation entirely. There is no villain here. No moral cautionary tale. Just a family adjusting in real time, as families do with more visibility than most. And perhaps that is the quiet truth underneath it all. Success can be structured. Reputation can be managed. Broadcasts can be rehearsed. But identity, especially a child's, cannot be anchored from the outside. It must be allowed to emerge. It's early morning in New York again. The city is still half asleep as the lights warm inside Studio 1A. Crew members move quietly across the floor. Papers shuffle. A producer counts down in a low, steady voice. Savannah Guthrie sits upright at the desk, shoulders squared, expression composed the familiar image millions trust before they've even had their first cup of coffee. On screen, the broadcast unfolds smoothly. But somewhere else, in a quieter room far from the cameras, the morning looks different. A kitchen table, a cereal bowl, a backpack leaning against a chair. Maybe a brief exchange about school, about plans for the afternoon. Ordinary moments that will never be replayed, never clipped, never shared. The public sees the broadcast. The family sees breakfast. There is no headline to summarize what shifted, no scandal to dissect, no dramatic fallout to analyze, just recalibration. Subtle, ongoing, human. A mother listening a little longer. A daughter speaking a little more clearly. A relationship adjusting in ways that rarely make news. The studio lights will continue to switch on. The red camera will blink. The country will tune in. But the most meaningful conversations won't happen there. You can anchor the news, but you cannot anchor another person's identity. If you believe the hardest conversations inside a family are often the most important ones, leave a like.